This is Talking Soundtracks with Jason Drury on the Cinematic Sound Radio Network.
Hello, my name is Jason Drury and welcome once again to Talking Soundtracks on the Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast. Emmy award-winning film and TV composer Christophe Beck has defined the sound of iconic productions such as Frozen, the HANGOVER franchise, the Muppets, and the cult classic TV series Buffy the Vampire Slayer. At the end of September 2024 for Talking Soundtracks on the Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast, I had the pleasure of talking to Christophe via Zoom at his home in Los Angeles. During the conversation, we talked, amongst other things, about his career to date, being tutored by the great Jerry Goldsmith, his work on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and composing on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, including his score on their latest release at time of recording, AGATHA All Along. But first, we talked about another of his recent scores, The Instigators, released on Apple Plus in August 2024. Directed by regular collaborator Doug Liman, the film starred Matt Damon and Casey Affleck as reluctant partners, a desperate father and an ex-con thrown together to rob a corrupt politician's ill-gained earnings. But when the heist goes wrong, the two find themselves engulfed in a whirlwind of chaos. Christophe Beck, welcome to Talking Soundtracks.
Thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you here. Now, first of all, how did you get involved scoring The Instigators?
Well, I've worked with director Doug Liman before on a couple of movies, Edge of Tomorrow and American Made. We had a great time working on those movies. Doug has a way of inviting me, and I've noticed with other composers he's worked with as well, into really pushing to find unconventional, untraditional ways of scoring movies. And I feel for me personally that I do some of my best work when I work with him. So he called me, actually, he had two movies that he was in post-production on at more or less the same time. They ended up being kind of one right after the other. One was Roadhouse for Amazon, and the other one was Instigators for Apple. And we got to talking about both movies, and it was a bit of an unusual situation to get into scoring two movies, one right after the other for the same director. It was a first for me, but it was a pretty exciting prospect. And after talking about it for a while, we ended up deciding to work on both. And, you know, the first one we talked about was The Instigators, and he sent me a cut of the movie, an early cut. And I was immediately taken with the chemistry between Matt Damon and Casey Affleck. I love heist movies. I've done one or two in the past, and it's been a second since I've gotten a chance to do one, especially one like this, where the characters are a little bit, they're not the most competent at what they're trying to do. And there's a real blue-collar aspect to their characters that gave me a hook to hang my hat on in terms of making it feel a little bit different, a little bit grittier, a little bit more loose, kind of like the way the actual heisting goes down in the film. But honestly, what made the movie so entertaining to me, just watching it was that comedic chemistry between Matt Damon and Casey Affleck. And I just really enjoyed, sometimes it's hard to watch early cuts of movies. They're works in progress. They're too long. But this one played for me like something I would have eagerly sought out and watched, even in the state that it was in, unfinished. It just was super entertaining and got me really excited about working on it.
This is very entertaining, very enjoyable heist movie with a lot of comic elements in there, which I quite enjoyed as well, and some interesting cameos, including Ron Perlman as the crime boss. How do you describe the musical tone of your score in relation to the picture?
Well, like I was saying earlier, there's a blue-collar aspect to it. There's an intricacy in the score that is juxtaposed with some of the sounds and textures and performances, musical performances in the score as well. And that mirrors the juxtaposition in the movie of the intricacy of their plans when they get it right, the sophistication, but at the same time, there's a looseness to it. There's an improvisatory feel to it. And it was important to both Doug and me that we reflect that juxtaposition in the music. My sort of default position when writing music is sophistication and depth appeals to me, and bringing in the elements of improvisation and looseness to offset that looked like, I worked with an incredible drummer named Arthur Dubois. I think he's based out of France. I found him on Instagram, and I worked with him to create these beds, and he uses extremely unusual combinations of instruments. And I worked with him to create a library of not only drum sounds, but ways of playing guitars with sticks. And his style is very precise and wildly imaginative. And I think the depth and the sophistication comes a lot from his approach and using his approach as a backbone for the score. And then on top of that, I layered a lot of acoustic bass. Acoustic bass is an instrument, unlike regular electric bass. You put your finger down on a bass, and on a normal electric bass, and you pluck a note, you're going to get that note. Similar to when you sit down at a piano and you hit a piano key, you're going to get that note. An acoustic bass does not have what we call frets, which are those raised ridges that help on a regular acoustic bass play the note. So what you end up with is a very loose, like the pitches are not exact. And the bass players I worked with, I encourage them to even loosen it up a little bit more. So you get a little bit of wildness and a little bit of chaos and unpredictability in the intentional lack of precision in the bass parts. And so that's a really integral voice of the score as well. And of course, besides that, a lot of attention placed on electronics and sounds that have organic origin, but then processed to become something else entirely. And sort of you get this combination of the familiar and the new that I find very, very fascinating. So I guess you could say the score is about the juxtaposition of things you would normally consider to be opposites, and playing with how working with those things together can create something that, to me anyway, is new and exciting.
As you said, you've worked with director Doug Liman in the past. How do you collaborate in movies? Does he give you any ideas what he wants the score to be, or does he give you free rein to decide how you would like the score to sound?
Well, there's always encouragement to think outside the box, so to speak, especially with Doug. And we had a lot of discussions before the Instigators about the characters and what makes them special and what makes them tick. And then it's up to me to go back to my studio and let something come through that feels right. And then we begin the process of the back and forth of playing what came through for me, what feels right to me, and seeing if it lands for him as well. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. That's the process. And we keep at it until we find something. There's the initial process too, which is finding the sound of the score, where I don't necessarily work to picture. I will write music that just feels like it says something about the character that's true. And then we will listen to it and discuss it and refine it until it feels like the truest expression of that character for both of us. And at that point, we have a palette. We have an idea of the style of the music, and we have an idea of the feelings that we want the music to evoke. And then I begin the work of applying all of that to each scene individually. And then there's a process that takes place over many months when we get together once every couple of weeks and review what I've done and see how it feels. And where it doesn't feel true enough to the characters, true enough to the story, where it doesn't align with Doug's vision, I take the feedback and give it another shot.
Looking at the movie in general, which parts of the movie did you find the most difficult in scoring? And on the other hand, which parts did you enjoy writing?
That's an interesting question, because there are scenes that come quickly and feel right, and that on first listen, Doug loved. And then there are also scenes that took a number of tries to get there. So on the one hand, they were easier, or they came quicker, the first kind. But on the other hand, like, there's something about the challenge of taking a swing and maybe missing, and taking another swing and maybe missing, and really thinking about and feeling into why the swings are misses, and the process of finally getting that hit, getting that landing that is kind of magical. I've always enjoyed the power that I feel as a composer in being able to make a scene feel this way over here on the left, or this way over here on the right. It's intoxicating. And when you finally get to that point where it's working, especially after a number of tries where it's not working and you don't feel that power and you don't feel that intoxication, it's immensely satisfying. So yeah, so the scenes that were the most challenging, I would say, but also the most rewarding, were some of the scenes, the big set pieces, the big heist action set pieces are more straightforward in a way. There's a lot of exploring of what the feeling needs to be. In those cases, it's pretty clear that the feeling needs to have, in the music, it needs to give us momentum. It needs to glue a lot of scenes that might be intercut with one another into a cohesive whole. It needs to provide excitement and maybe a little suspense or danger. And it's pretty straightforward in that way. But the scenes where we get into some of the interpersonal dynamics, there's a character in the movie who's a therapist, who's a pretty complex character. Of course, Matt Damon's character is also very complex. He's a very reluctant criminal in this movie. There's a lot of nuance to both of those characters. And when they interact and have conversations, and music is meant to support those conversations, that music is much simpler as music than a big action set pieces music might be. But the challenge of finding the right tone is less straightforward. So I would say those scenes were the most challenging and also the most rewarding.
how long was the complete score for the Instigators? And how long did it take you to work finally on the Instigators, from the composing stage right up to the recording sessions?
I would say it was 3 or 4 months of work on that score to write 35 to 40 minutes of finished music in the movie. That's pretty typical, but it varies widely, especially in situations where they've already used a lot of their time and effort on another composer, and they decide for whatever reason it's not working. And then a new composer is brought in, and that might be me in some cases, and I might have 2 weeks. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, especially in animation, where production time is measured in years, not months, I might be working on an animated film for a year or longer. But more typical is 3 or 4 months. The amount of music in movies varies widely as well. You know, when I sign up to do a movie for Marvel, those movies have music basically from the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie. You might be looking at an hour and a half or longer of finished music. A movie more grounded in reality, like The Instigators, would naturally have less music.
Let's go back to the very beginning of your music career. How did your interest in film music actually start?
Before I ever got into film music, I really wanted to be a rock star. I grew up loving pop music, as many of us do. Knew that I had this drive in me to express myself through music. And because I was so into pop music, that's where I focused my energies. I had dreams of being a rock star. I used to put on headphones and play drums to my favorite albums, imagining I was on stage with my favorite bands. I spent most of my middle school and high school years completely immersed in this dream of becoming a famous rock star. It wasn't until I got to college that I started to understand that maybe it wasn't the best fit for me and what I'm good at and what I have fun doing. Like being on stage is terrifying to me. I can't sing. I can't write lyrics. And I realized as I matured and became an adult that I was more comfortable in a behind the scenes role. And at that point, I knew I wanted a career in music. I hadn't really thought about what that might look like. I was interested in maybe writing Broadway musicals. And honestly, what tipped the scales for me into film scoring, I was in the career guidance office of the college I went to, and I was looking at summer internships in electronic music, synthesizer programming, and literally a single crudely printed pamphlet fell out of another pamphlet. And it was a pamphlet for the USC film scoring program. And at the time, I think it had only been around a few years. Now it's well established as one of the premier programs of its kind. At the time, it was the only program of its kind. And it was like the universe showing me that there was this whole other path to go down that I could explore, which I did. And I very quickly learned that film scoring had a lot of the elements that felt like a real good fit for me. I was always attracted to storytelling. I was also always attracted to giving myself deadlines and motivation for music making. I noticed For example, my senior project at school was an opera, which I didn't start writing until I booked the venue. And now I had a deadline. And so I thought, you know what? This is the deadlines, the music being in service of telling a story were all things that really fit with when I looked at like what were the ways that just from a practical level, I could take my passion for music and turn it into a career. So I went to USC and very quickly found out that I was right. It was a fit. The prospect of working to help tell stories that could be enjoyed by a huge number of people, the idea that my music would touch that many people in the way that it's shared with the world. The intoxicating feeling I mentioned earlier that sometimes comes up when I score a scene and feel like I had a real role in helping tell that story a very particular way that feels very powerful. All this would just really lit me up, and I just dove in head first.
Now, one of your teachers at USC was a certain Jerry Goldsmith. What was he like as a teacher, and what was the most important things you learned from his tutoring?
Okay, well, the first thing I learned was just how great he really was. As I mentioned before, film scoring was not really on my radar until right before I actually decided to check it out. I know the Star Wars scores affected me, but I never really followed the industry. I didn't pay much attention to the names on the screen besides John Williams. And really beginning my classes at USC with Jerry was my first exposure to how incredible a composer he was. What was he like as a teacher? He did not have much of a bedside manner, let's say, when it came to his teaching. But I'm proud to say he always liked me. He wrote me a beautiful recommendation letter, which I actually posted on my social media some years ago, and recognized something in me that was really inspiring and honestly remains so to this day. The thing he taught all of us in that class, the thing he talked about over and over again, and you can hear in his music in a way, is rare, is economy, is making a whole piece of work out of very simple elements that recur and repeat and get played with and get turned upside down and backwards. Such a gifted melodic writer. So the idea that we use themes to represent characters and situations and story elements in film scoring is something he really espoused, and you can hear it in his work in every one of his scores. But then the way he takes those themes and uses them to inform every other cue in the movie creates a sense of oneness that is rare. He always had his eye on the big picture, and his gift for simplicity also follows that same aesthetic. It's like a composer's role in composing film music is not to just smother a movie with music. It's to thoughtfully feel into what does this scene need and how can I do the simplest, the least amount of showing off or musicking it in order to achieve that effect. And when it's done correctly, it still not only works as music on its own, but when married to the picture, it's like a straight shot to the heart of the audience. And I would say his talent for economy, it goes a little bit to the intoxication that I was talking about earlier. Part of the intoxication is just like, all I need to do is move my finger a little bit here, and I create on the piano keyboard while I'm playing, and it creates a totally different mood, right? It's a tiny movement of the finger that has enormous power. And I think he was able to harness the power of execution that is so simple, yet has such an impact. It would not surprise me to learn in time, and we have the proper historical context, that Jerry's talent for economy and harnessing the power of that economy is right up there with Beethoven.
Well, you had a great teacher in Jerry Goldsmith. With all that knowledge he gave you, you tried to find work in the film music industry. How did you get your first assignment? Or what was your first assignment?
My first assignment came as a result of my being Canadian. I was recommended by a current teacher while I was at USC to a former teacher at USC who needed assistance on a TV show that was based in Canada and needed Canadian composers. And that show was called White Fang. And it was very loosely based on the Jack London novels. So I would go to class during the day and stay up all night writing. I was 22, so that came easy back then. Not so much anymore. What followed was an internship with legendary TV composer Mike Post, also in his own way, a master of economy and gifted tunesmith. That led to a job with him for a year where I assisted him in the studio. It was right at the beginning of the home studio revolution, and we were all trying to figure out how we could make scores in our home studios. In Mike's case, it wasn't literally his home, it was an office, but I became his producer. He used to call me his synthestrator. And that led to working on contributing writing-wise to some of his shows as well. It was just an incredible education. He was an incredible mentor. Wow, he was so efficient in terms of just how fast he would write his scores. I really learned from him the value of, our deadlines are so tight. It's very easy as a composer and as an artist to fall down rabbit holes. Like, is this the best possible idea for this scene? Is there something else out there that could be better? I really learned from him the trusting of instincts, like first idea, second idea, maybe third idea, trusting that what's coming through is what's true and going with that instead of as a composer, letting myself get in my head about falling down a 3-day rabbit hole around something that might be a very minor detail and just losing sight of the fact that I'm not making an album here, I'm making a film score, and there are release dates and there are time pressures, and just finding that balance. He was an incredible mentor. I learned so much about the value of relationships when building a career from him. And he had a remarkably stress-free approach to the job and a stress-free approach to writing, and just a love of writing that was incredibly inspiring as well.
Which TV series did you work with Mike Post on?
NYPD Blue, Law and Order were the two big ones. And then there were a handful of other ones as well. Murder One.
Okay. Yeah, Murder One. I remember that very well. It's an amazing show.
Yeah, an amazing show and groundbreaking in so many ways. And others.
Talking of TV series, the first credit I saw your name on the TV, probably at the end of an episode, was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. How did you get involved with Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
After my year with Mike Post, I went out and started to try to get TV work of my own, which it took a second to get that part of my career rolling, that early part of my career, but I did end up scoring a couple seasons of one show, another season of another show. Nothing that was as popular or as part of the culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer ended up being. But, I mentioned relationships and how one of the things Mike taught me was the value of relationships. It ended up being a producer of one of those shows I believe the show was called Spy Game, who, after that show ended, moved on to become a producer for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Buffy's first season was scored by someone who they did not want to continue with, and so they opened it up. And of course, by this time, my friend, whose name is David Greenwalt, who I had worked with on Spy Game, was now on Buffy and recommended me to Joss Whedon. And I went in for an interview. Joss listened to a demo tape that I had put together, liked my music, liked meeting me, and I was hired. It was an incredibly quick and simple process. By the time I got on the show, it was already a phenomenon. So there was that part of it that was new to me, the excitement of working on something that people were talking about, that was part of the culture. But also the way Joss put the show together was like each episode was like a feature film to me. Each episode had this incredible way of tackling really big themes: good, evil, end of the world, doomed love, in the context of high schoolers, that felt really new and fresh. And I got the opportunity as a composer to sink my teeth into those big themes. And Joss loved, and still does, movie music. And I took the show as an opportunity to make it feel expansive, to make it feel big and important. And the palette was orchestral, symphonic, traditional in a lot of ways, but also with opportunities to make it feel a little bit more contemporary here and there. It was so inspiring and such an incredible training ground. By that point in my career, didn't have a ton of experience writing symphonic music, and it was like a personal laboratory for me to explore all the different ways I could express myself with that palette.
What was the size of the orchestra you were given for Buffy?
0.
Oh.
That was also, the home studio revolution was in full swing by then. Virtual orchestra, and it was very early days for virtual orchestras. It was a real challenge. I bring in, I say 0, it's actually 1 to 2. I would bring in a soloist, a woodwind player, a brilliant woodwind player who I still work with when I can, a guy named Chris Bleth, and he would come in with his whole collection of woodwinds, oboes, English horns, flutes, clarinets, bass clarinets. And so I could sweeten the virtual orchestra with soloists, which, it was a lot of experimenting. How do I make this pile of electronic equipment? It wasn't even computers then. It was all outside the computer. Sound as realistic as possible and express myself in a way that feels true. And I found that adding the human element, even if it's just one instrument, really lifts, just from a production standpoint, it really lifts the sound of the score. I would also bring in a string player sometimes, just one at a time. But yeah, that there was no orchestra to speak of besides soloists here and there to sweeten it.
When was the first time you scored a movie with a proper orchestra, i.e. with real people completely?
Big Fat Liar. Hold on. No, I'm going to go with Bring It On. I know we're going to talk about Marvel in a second. Bring It On was my first time working with Peyton Reed, who's the director of the Ant-Man film. You said proper orchestra. So that was a contemporary score with quite a bit of orchestral sweetening, especially essentially Bring It On is it's a cheerleading movie, but essentially it's a sports movie. So we leaned into that quality of it a little bit. And to get the drama we did hire strings and brass players to sweeten on top of a bunch of contemporary sounds and beats and synths.
Now, which of your early scores you feel was important to you in honing your film music technique?
Wow, it's a tough question. They all contribute in some way. The first one that comes to mind is Guinevere. This is a movie I don't know if people remember. It was directed by a woman named Audrey Wells, who directed another film I scored called Under the Tuscan Sun. But Guinevere was a very early score. It was my first real drama, I would say. It was a love story. And it was my first experience scoring something that had so much heart with electronics. The idea to do it electronically without any real instruments was partly one of practicality. There simply wasn't the budget to hire an orchestra, but also an opportunity to explore something that at the time, anyway, I hadn't seen done very much and certainly was new to me, which is how would you score a love story that has a lot of dramatic elements with electronics? And we actually brought in the main actress of that film named Sarah Polley to sing on it as well. So it was all electronic except for the female voice sung by the lead actress. And I learned so much about working with singers. I had a lot of experience, especially with Buffy, faking an orchestra. And I learned so much about that just from a production standpoint. But this was my first time doing an unapologetically electronic score. And I returned to doing unapologetically electronic scores here and there throughout my career. I would love to do it some more as I move forward. That's a very important voice that I have of expressing myself and helping tell stories that I'd love to exercise more.
Now, you've done a lot of work for Disney over the years. We will look at your work with the Marvel Cinematic Universe in due time, but first we must mention your work on the multi-award-winning Disney musical Frozen. How did that come about, and what are your memories working on that project?
Well, how it came about was extraordinary good luck, as is often the case in this business. I got a call from Disney Animation well before Frozen was even in consideration of going into animation. I didn't even know it existed, but I got a call from Disney about a short. They had, I think they've moved away from it a little bit now. I'm not sure if they still do the shorts the way there was a period of time when Disney feature films always started with a short. You would go to see a movie and there would be a 5 or 10 minute short before the movie starts. And it was an amazing program that they instituted in order to give their employees a chance to express themselves, to level up, to try their hand at directing. And there was a director working on a short called Paperman at Disney who happened to be a fan of my brother's. My brother is Chili Gonzalez, an incredibly successful and incredibly talented recording artist and producer over in Europe. He was a fan of his, and just because he knew he was going to need a composer I think initially he thought about maybe trying to hire him, and then he found out that I existed, that I was his brother, and he got interested in my work and became a fan of mine and decided he wanted to hire me for his short. And of course, I think my generation of composers, when we were starting out in the 90s, 2000s, like scoring a Disney animated film was like a pinnacle, a dream. Right after I was at USC being taught by Jerry Goldsmith, he scored Mulan. And so it was really at some point down the road, like a dream of mine to finally score a Disney animated film. And this was not a feature film, it was a short, but it was so exciting to be called. Here's where the luck comes in. It turns out this director, John Cars, who was a fan of mine and wanted to hire me, is also incredibly talented himself, made an incredible short film that really features music. There's no dialogue. The music is integral to the telling of the story. It's an incredible showpiece for music, and it wins the Best Animated Short Oscar that year. Disney loved the movie, loved the score. And when it came time to hire a composer for their next animated feature, which was Frozen at that time, they called me. And the way Disney does it is they do not make a short list of 8 composers and have a bunch of interviews. They decide who they think is the best fit, and they bring them in, and there's a meeting, and then that's it. And so that's how I was hired on Frozen. Of course, at the time, none of us knew it would become what it did become, but it was that notwithstanding, it was still the realization of a dream that I had for most of my adult life.
And what a wonderful score it is. And you still collaborate with the songwriters to this day with some work on, even with the MCU.
That's right. Yeah. Bobby Lopez and his wife, Kristen, are the songwriters. Bobby and I did not meet or hang out in college, but we were part of the same a cappella singing group. I'll give them a little plug right now, the Yale Spizwinks. And Bobby always wanted to work in Hollywood with his songwriting and his musicals that were pouring out of him, and saw that we had this connection through our singing group, and reached out to me out of the blue just to say hi and send me some of his work. We became acquaintances. I would see him at college reunions, and Frozen was our first opportunity to actually work together. And since then, we've worked together on a whole bunch of stuff. It's like we follow each other around, can't get rid of each other. Frozen, Frozen 2, the MCU stuff, WandaVision, and now, of course, Agatha All Along, which is my latest project that just got released on Disney+. And I love working with him. There's a trust there. He trusts me to take their material. All the projects I've worked with them on has been with them as a team. They trust me to take their material and incorporate it into the score in a very loving and respectful way. And honestly, I love doing it. I think it's really important when you work on, especially a musical, but even these Marvel projects, which are not musicals, it's the Jerry Goldsmith teaching that's my DNA now, right? Like, you never miss an opportunity to apply connective tissue to a piece of work, whether it's one single score or whether it's a collection of songs and a score. It creates an experience that is deeper and more meaningful for the audience.
And your music adds so much to the MCU music canon, and so many great composers that worked on it, and you have contributed to it very, very well indeed, with some wonderful scores, starting with Ant-Man. But first of all, how did you first get invited to work on the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Well, I had sniffs at the MCU over the course of many years. The first Marvel project I work on was not an MCU project, and it was not produced by Marvel. It was produced by Fox, and it was Elektra with Jennifer Garner. And I had an incredible experience working on that film. It's one of the scores I'm most proud of. The techniques I was using to combine orchestra and electronic processing at the time were super exciting to me. And to this day, I can go back and listen to that and really feel how adventurous and experimental I was. And then sometime after that was when Marvel made the fateful decision to sort of grab back as much of their intellectual property as they could and start making movies on their own when Kevin Feige took the helm. And from that point on, I had sniffs at different projects. I demoed for a project here, I demoed for a project there, and nothing ever quite hit. And it wasn't until Peyton Reed came along directing the first Ant-Man movie where the stars aligned. What stars were aligning? One being that I scored Peyton's first movie, and it was my first movie. So we have that history and quite a bit of nostalgia going back to that project, which was, as I mentioned before, Bring It On. There was the fact that even though I hadn't quite worked with the MCU yet, I was on their radar, so I wasn't an unknown quantity. And frankly, by that point, Frozen had come out. And when your name is attached to a movie like Frozen, people notice. So the stars aligned, and when my name got brought up, there was like, from all these different points involved with the movie, kind of recognition and excitement. And that's how I got involved with the first Ant-Man movie.
Yes, Ant-Man, another heist movie, in a way, just like the Instigators. So, you seem to do very well in heist movies. You've worked with a number of directors over the years. Well, what are your favourite director collaborations to this date?
Well, every director I work with brings their own vision, their own way of thinking about music. And part of the challenge for me is to, in a way, get inside their head every experience, some of them are more challenging than others, helps me understand storytelling better. So I'm loath to choose any one particular collaboration over the other. I will say I love director collaborations where the director keeps hiring me. I like that. I will also single out Audrey Wells, who passed away a few years ago. I really enjoyed working with her. I only worked on 2 movies with her, Guinevere, which I talked about earlier, and Under the Tuscan Sun. She was such a remarkable human being and a very good friend. I still not only grieve her passing, but also grieve the movies that she never got to make.
Which genres do you like working on the most?
I enjoy working the most on films where I am invited to bring more of my own expression to the proceedings. So I take every job, as I mentioned, every job as a personal challenge to succeed and to help tell a story, not just the way I think it should be told, but to help tell a story the way, as a team, the filmmakers and I want it to be told. Some genres afford more opportunity to get into that more personal expression than others. I loved working on the Muppet movies. I loved working with the filmmaking team on that. They're such good movies. They're so much fun. The movies are so silly. And the challenge there is to come up with music that supports the silliness. And oftentimes that looks like really taking a situation and expressing it musically in a very extreme way. And there's something incredibly rewarding and fun about that. And sitting in a theater, having something happen on screen that's supported in a way musically that creates laughter in the entire theater is incredibly rewarding. And then there's a different type of reward for films where I get to create more of the Jerry Goldsmith model of composing, where I get to feel like I'm creating something that stands together as a cohesive piece. I will say I've never scored a horror movie, and I long to explore that side of me, that more darker, more twisted side.
Buffy was the closest in that case.
Yeah, yes. And, you know, I will say Agatha All Along has a lot of horror elements too. A really heartfelt, intense drama that's just about characters, I think would be an incredible opportunity to get very inside with the music. There's a lot when you're scoring an action sequence, for example, or a comedy bit where it feels like there's opportunities to get inside the characters, especially in comedies, where you get inside the character to amplify and exaggerate what's happening inside. But I think there is a unique and could be an incredibly rewarding challenge to get inside a character's head to express a truth as opposed to an exaggeration that I think could be incredibly rewarding as well.
Now, obviously, you're a huge admirer of the work of Jerry Goldsmith. His musical style you loved and am kind of inspired. But is there any other composer as you feel have influenced your musical style? And is there any other composers away from Jerry Goldsmith that you also admire in the film music or in the classical world?
Yes, a ton. Honestly, the biggest influence on my style is 80s pop music. Not long ago, I went to a Depeche Mode concert, and I had not listened to that music in a very long time when I went to this concert. And by the end of the concert, I feel like I needed to take a cold shower or something, because what I heard over and over again was like the seeds of my style. And it really hit me like throughout the course of the night, just how influential their particular melodic style is, the way they structure their songs, and the way pop music is structured in general, how that influences how I approach film music. John Williams was a huge inspiration. I don't know that I hear in my work that much of an influence on my style. Certainly there are so many things about him that I admire in his music. And where I can, some of those influences shine through a little bit. I will also single out Thomas Newman, his commitment to finding unconventional and adventurous ways to score movies, both musically and in his process. His ability to be minimalist. Oh, speaking of minimalism, that blows me away. I will say Johan Johansson who's no longer with us, but his music was incredibly inspiring to me. One of the things that I love about John Williams's music is when I hear it, it's a mystery to me. I don't know how he's doing what he's doing. There's so much intricacy and sophistication and depth and fireworks. And I listen to that music and I think I need to look at a score to really dissect what notes he's using, what instruments he's using, how he's creating this effect, that effect. When I listen to a composer like Johan Johansson's music, the mystery is totally different and even more mysterious. You know, the mystery of John Williams' music can be demystified by looking at a score, right? And you can look at it, learn from it, try to imitate it, probably not succeed. But with Johan Johansson, when I hear his music, it's pretty easy to tell what's going on from a technical analysis perspective. His music it really embraces minimalism. What's mysterious about it to me is just how compelling it is. And it's really like, again, the power of being able to do so much with so little that Jerry Goldsmith was a master of. Here's another composer, Johan Johansson, who is equally masterful. And I don't know how he does it. I don't know what it is about his music that it feels so compelling to me when I can just listen to it one time and hear exactly what's going on. There's something in the way he puts it together that is incredibly mysterious to me, and that's very exciting to me. I will also just want to shout out for pure audaciousness, and I don't see this as an influence on my work. I want it to be. The movie Poor Things was scored by a composer whose name escapes me at the moment. He was
Justin Fendrix.
That score blew my mind. Its audaciousness. It's just like saying, screw all the convention, screw all the history of like how you're supposed to score movies. I'm just going to get completely inside this character's head, which is an exploration of just lunacy that was so compelling to me and inspiring in current time in a way that inspires me to bring that amount of original thinking to my own work. Yeah.
To date, which of the scores that you've composed so far, which you are the most proud of?
The short answer is the one I'm most proud of is the one I just finished, always. And that would be Agatha All Along. I look back at my career, it's a little bit like choosing your favorite child. Every score that I write brings its own sets of challenges and rewards. I can certainly look at a score like Frozen and feel proud of the fact that the movie has entered the public consciousness in a way that feels very, very special. And of course, I'm very proud of the music in that film as well. I can look at certain scores where I tried and succeeded to experiment with different recording and production techniques. Tower Heist, another heist movie, was a movie that I recorded with two drummers playing in unison in the same room together. You know, two drummers in a band is pretty rare, but it happened in the 70s a lot in prog rock. I grew up a fan of prog rock to some degree. I love the way the drums sound on that score, for example. But now I don't really have a favorite per se.
Are you the sort of composer once you've finished the project, you're trying to forget that project and then concentrate all on the next project? Or do you still keep memories of the previous project?
Every once in a while I have the opportunity, mostly unintentionally, revisit old scores. It's fun to hear a slice of my musical life from the past. It's also tough for me not to get immediately into self-criticism and been like, oh, that's an interesting decision I made. Would I have made that today? And then maybe even like an urge, which is silly because there's nothing I can do about it, but an urge to go back and like fix it. And then every once in a while, I will on purpose go back and listen to something because I think it'll be fun. And sometimes it is. But generally, yes, finish something, give it my all, pour my soul into it, celebrate its completion, celebrate the project getting out into the world, and move on.
What is your current view of the film music industry in general?
I think the industry, first the home studio revolution, the democratization of the tools available to people has really opened up the industry to all kinds of incredible talent. There is work being done in the field that constantly blows me away. Like, forgive me, the Poor Things composer's name escapes me again.
Justin Fendrix.
And he's not a household name. And then you've got composers like Hans Zimmer who are constantly pushing the art forward with the way his particular genius comes from, the way he, I am in incredible admiration of how he becomes literally a part of the filmmaking team. You know, he considers himself more filmmaker than composer. And when you combine that amount of really deep thinking and a very deep approach to storytelling, he's another one that is kind of, to me, similar to the Johan Johanssons of the world, where his music has a simplicity to it that has such a direct connection to the heart and to the soul. And then also his, he's always pushing with experimental production techniques. I think the state of the art is incredible right now. I think the state of the industry is in a little bit of chaos and a little bit of flux. There's a lot happening with the film industry as a whole, the 1-2 punch of COVID and the strikes. And then add to that the looming, I won't even say threat, but the looming emergence of AI. I think it's a very uncertain period right now for the industry.
Yes, I had a previous conversation, a very interesting conversation on one of my previous podcasts with orchestrator Lee Phillips about the concern of AI. I feel with AI, you lose like the human effect with like composers used to have this definitive sound, like John Bader definitive sound, John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith at times. You lose that using artificial intelligence writing music, and it would be a shame that will happen.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll leave it to your listeners to go find the Lee Phillips podcast to get a little more in depth about that. But it's a little bit scary for sure. You know, I've always been very forward thinking technologically. You know, when drum machines came out, people were like, this is the end. You know, we need human drummers. When samplers came out and that could start emulating orchestras. People saying, this is the end of film scoring. We need actual orchestras. And doesn't look like the way it did before, but there are still drummers. There are still orchestras. And I've always embraced the technology to help me do what I want to and need to do. And now this feels different, obviously, because, it's brought me into a lot of introspection about how I was on one side of the technology advancement, you could say a more selfish side, where samplers come in and it's exciting to me because it lets me express myself in new ways, but at the expense of other artists. Now we're in this position where the other artists for whom the technology might be at the expense of is me. I'm on the other side of that. And then there's a reframing too, like, well, am I really? Is there a way I could incorporate AI into my own workflow in a way that actually helps me express myself in the way that I want to express myself? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But I am certainly very curious to see how it all plays out. In the meantime, as long as there's opportunities for me to keep expressing myself in the way that is meaningful to me and meaningful to my career, I'll keep doing it.
And long may that continue, as I am a huge fan of your music, and your music continues to grow with the latest incarnation from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, AGATHA All Along. How was it like returning to the Marvel Cinematic Universe with your trusty songwriting team, Christian Anderson and Robert Lopez, who also created some more excellent and wonderful batches of songs for the series?
I want to shout out to my co-composer, Michael Paraskevas, who I've been working with for a very long time. He is brilliant and did so much great work on this show. And we worked together on it as we did Hawkeye, and his role has been increasing to the point where it really felt right to share credit with him. He deserves it. Working with the MCU is always great. The palette that is available to me is huge. I get to write real movie music, quote unquote. I get to work with people who love movie music and love what it can do to help tell stories. Kevin Feige leads the charge on this, and then that thoughtfulness and passion for film music really trickles down into everyone who comes through there.
Yes, and I remember from the very first episode, for the first few minutes of it, it sounded like you was going a detective drama, a complete tangent to what the series was actually all about. It reminded me of WandaVision, those wonderful sitcom theme tunes and the sitcom music at the start of it before it gradually changes, with the hint already spawned from your excellent end credit music telling the viewer that what you're watching is not what it seems to be.
Thank you. And what an incredible opportunity for a composer to be presented with a show like that, that trusts the audience enough to, from minute one, episode one, just present the audience with something that feels so out of left field, that doesn't make any sense, but in a way that trusts them to stay engaged and to not really reveal what's really going on until the fourth episode. And I really appreciated the opportunity to do the same thing in Agatha All Along. Of course, it's a different flavor show. They're different characters, so it's not quite done the exact same way. But I love that they carried on this idea of minute one, episode one, you're in a situation that doesn't quite make sense, and you get to go along for the ride as an audience member as things are revealed to you, and then I get to play with that.
Yes, it must be a joy for a composer to work on such a series. And after Agatha All Along, are there any other future projects we'll be hearing your wonderful music in the near future?
I've got a few in the works. I am not able to talk about yet. I'm working on an album with my wife. That's a personal project. I can't get into any more specifics than that, but there are exciting things cooking.
Excellent. Really looking forward to hearing those as well. Christophe Beck, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us in this edition of Talking Soundtracks, and every success in your future endeavours.
Thank you, Jason. Really appreciate it.
I do hope you have enjoyed my interview with Emmy Award-winning composer Christophe Beck. I must mention here that the Talking Soundtracks theme was composed by David Corsina, and the soundtrack album for The Instigators is available digitally from Apple Music. I leave you some more music from Christophe Beck's latest score at the time of recording, Agatha All Along, co-composed with Michael Parakifis, with the score version of the song, The Ballad of the Witch's Road. My sincere thanks again to Christophe Beck for joining us on this edition of Talking Soundtracks on the Cinematic Sound Radio podcast. And until we meet again, from me, Jason Drury, is take care and happy listening.
Thank you for listening to the Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast. I want to thank Tim Burton for providing his voice for all the bumpers you hear throughout the program, and to David Casina for providing Cinematic Sound Radio's theme music. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please email us at cinematicsound@yahoo.com. You can find us on social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And wherever you're listening to us today, please take a moment right now to leave us a rating and a review of the podcast. You can get a Cinematic Sound Radio t-shirt at our TeePublic store. You can join our Patreon at patreon.com/cinematicsoundradio. And don't forget to check us out on the web at cinematicsound.net.